Emma had never imagined sharing her home with a stranger, yet here she was, 3 months after her mother's wedding, still adjusting to the presence of her new stepbrother. At 20 years old, Jack was only a year older than Emma, making their situation feel even more awkward. The spring afternoon filled her bedroom with golden light as Emma sat cross-legged on her bed, trying to focus on her textbook. The house felt unusually quiet with her mother and stepfather away for the weekend, leaving her and Jack alone for the first time since their parents had married. Emma tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and sighed. She couldn't concentrate knowing Jack was just down the hall. They had been polite but distant with each other, exchanging brief greetings and little else. Emma had built walls around herself, unwilling to let this unexpected addition to her family get too close. A soft knock on her door startled her. "Yes," she called out, closing her book. Jack stood in the doorway, his tall frame filling the space. His dark hair fell across his forehead in a way that made Emma look away quickly. "I made some coffee," he said, holding up 2 mugs. "Thought you might need some." Emma hesitated. This was the first time he had sought her out. "Thanks," she said finally, accepting the mug he offered. Their fingers brushed, and she noticed how warm his hands were. "Studying hard?" Jack asked, lingering in the doorway. "Trying to," Emma admitted, not very successfully. "Mind if I?" He gestured vaguely into her room. After a moment, Emma nodded, and Jack settled into the chair by her desk. The silence between them felt heavy with unspoken words. "This is weird, isn't it?" Jack said suddenly, breaking the tension. "All of this. Becoming a family overnight." Emma looked up, surprised by his directness. "Yeah," she agreed, "very weird. I want you to know," Jack continued, wrapping his hands around his mug, "I never meant to invade your space. This was your home first." His honesty caught Emma off guard. She had assumed he was as comfortable with their situation as their parents seemed to be. "It's not your fault," she said. "It's just different." Jack smiled, and Emma noticed how it transformed his face, creating small dimples in his cheeks. Different is one way to put it. They fell into conversation then, more easily than Emma had expected. Jack told her about his photography passion, his eyes lighting up as he described the abandoned buildings he loved to capture. Emma found herself sharing details about her literature major and her dream of becoming a writer someday. "I'd love to read something you've written," Jack said, and the genuine interest in his voice made Emma's cheeks warm. As the afternoon light shifted to early evening, Emma realized they'd been talking for hours. Jack stood to leave, pausing at her door. "Maybe we could do this again sometime," he suggested, his voice casual but his eyes hopeful. "I'd like that," Emma said, surprising herself with her sincerity. After Jack left, Emma sat still for a long moment. Something had shifted between them, a small opening in the walls she had built. She wasn't ready to call it friendship yet, but it was a beginning. Later that night, Emma padded to the kitchen for a glass of water. The house was dark and quiet, but a soft light spilled from under the door of what was now Jack's room. As she passed, she heard gentle guitar music and paused, listening to the melody. She hadn't known he played. Standing there in the darkness, Emma felt a strange flutter in her chest. Jack wasn't who she had expected. He was thoughtful, interesting, and surprisingly easy to talk to when she gave him a chance. Back in her bed, Emma stared at the ceiling, thinking about their conversation. She had been so determined to keep her distance, to protect the life she knew. But maybe, just maybe, this change didn't have to be something she merely endured. Perhaps it could be something more. With that thought, Emma drifted to sleep, unaware that across the hall, Jack lay awake thinking of her. The weeks passed, and the awkward silence between Emma and Jack slowly transformed into comfortable familiarity. Their parents noticed the change, exchanging pleased glances when the two would laugh at inside jokes during family dinners. Emma found herself looking forward to their conversations, which often stretched late into the night. One rainy Saturday afternoon, Emma curled up in the living room with her favorite novel. The sound of the front door opening made her look up. Jack stood in the doorway, rain dripping from his hair and jacket. "You're soaked," Emma said, setting her book aside. Jack grinned, shaking water from his hair like a dog. "Got caught in the downpour. What are you reading?" Emma held up the book. "Just an old favorite." "Wait, is that Fitzgerald?" Jack moved closer, his interest piqued. "The Great Gatsby is my all-time favorite book." "Mine too," Emma admitted, surprised by yet another thing they had in common. Jack disappeared to change, returning minutes later in dry clothes, his hair still damp. He settled beside Emma on the couch, closer than he normally would. Emma felt a strange awareness of the small space between them, the warmth radiating from his body. "Read to me?" he asked, nodding toward the book in her hands. Emma hesitated only briefly before opening to her favorite passage. As she read, she felt Jack's eyes on her face rather than the pages. Her voice faltered slightly, and she glanced up to find him watching her, with an intensity that made her heart beat faster. "You have a beautiful reading voice," he said softly when she finished. Emma felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Thanks," she murmured, suddenly very aware of how close they were sitting. Jack reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her skin. The touch was brief, but sent a current through Emma that she hadn't expected. She looked up, meeting his eyes, seeing something there that made her breath catch. The moment was broken by the sound of keys in the front door. They moved apart instinctively as their parents entered, bringing shopping bags and cheerful conversation. That night, Emma lay awake, replaying the moment on the couch. Jack's touch had felt different, intentional in a way that couldn't be mistaken for brotherly affection. The thought both thrilled and confused her. The next morning, Emma found Jack in the kitchen making breakfast. He looked up when she entered, a smile spreading across his face. "Morning," he said, sliding a cup of coffee toward her, made exactly how she liked it. "Sleep well?" "Not really," Emma admitted, accepting the coffee. Their fingers brushed, and neither pulled away immediately. "Me neither," Jack confessed, his voice lower. "I kept thinking about yesterday." Emma felt her pulse quicken. "What about yesterday?" Jack turned to face her fully, leaning against the counter. "About how much I enjoy spending time with you. How that might be a problem." "Because we're," Emma couldn't quite say the word. "Step-siblings," Jack finished for her. "Yeah." Emma sipped her coffee, using the moment to gather her thoughts. "We barely knew each other before our parents married. We're practically strangers who happen to live in the same house." Jack's eyes flickered with something that looked like hope. "Is that how you see us? As strangers?" "No," Emma said honestly. "Not anymore." The kitchen fell silent except for the soft ticking of the clock. Jack moved closer, setting his mug down. "Emma," he began, his voice serious. "I think I'm—" The sound of a door opening upstairs interrupted him. They stepped apart as footsteps approached the kitchen. Later that day, Emma sat in her room. Unable to focus on her homework, she kept replaying Jack's unfinished sentence in her mind, wondering what he had been about to say. A text message lit up her phone. It was from Jack. "Meet me on the porch tonight after everyone's asleep." Emma stared at the message, her heart racing. Typing quickly before she could change her mind, she replied with a simple yes. That evening, Emma listened to the sounds of the house settling for the night. Her mother's soft snoring drifted from down the hall. The clock on her nightstand read 11:30 p.m. Quietly, she slipped out of bed, wondering what waited for her on the porch, and what lines they might be about to cross. The night air felt cool against Emma's skin as she stepped onto the porch. Jack was already there, sitting on the swing, his profile illuminated by the soft glow of moonlight. He looked up when he heard her, a smile spreading across his face that made Emma's stomach flutter. "You came," he said softly, as if he hadn't quite believed she would. Emma nodded, moving to sit beside him on the swing. "Of course I did." They sat in silence for a moment, the gentle creaking of the swing the only sound between them. Emma was acutely aware of Jack's arm just inches from hers, the warmth of his body in the cool night air. "I couldn't stop thinking about what I was going to say in the kitchen," Jack finally said, turning to face her, before we were interrupted. Emma's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he could hear it. "What were you going to say?" Jack took a deep breath. "That I think I'm feeling things I shouldn't be feeling. For you." His voice was barely above a whisper. "And it scares me, Emma. Not just because of our parents, but because I don't want to ruin what we've built." Emma looked down at her hands. "I've been feeling things too," she admitted, her voice catching. "I try not to, but—" Jack reached out slowly, taking her hand in his. His touch sent electricity through her veins. "What do we do about it?" he asked. "I don't know," Emma whispered truthfully. "This is all so complicated." Jack's thumb traced circles on her palm, each touch making it harder for Emma to think clearly. Maybe we just take it one day at a time, he suggested. See where it leads us. Emma looked up, meeting his gaze. His eyes were dark and intense in the moonlight, filled with questions and possibilities. She found herself leaning closer, drawn to him like a magnet. Jack's free hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch feather-light. Emma, he murmured, her name sounding like a prayer on his lips. When their lips finally met, it was soft and hesitant at first, a question being asked. Then Emma's hands found their way to Jack's shoulders, and the kiss deepened. His arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her closer as the swing moved gently beneath them. Emma had been kissed before, but never like this. Never with this rush of forbidden excitement, this sense of rightness despite everything that should make it wrong. Jack's hands tangled in her hair as he kissed her with growing urgency, making her forget everything except the feel of him against her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Jack rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since the day we read together, he confessed. Emma smiled, her lips still tingling. Me too. A light suddenly flickered on inside the house, startling them apart. They waited, hearts racing, but no one appeared. The light went off again after a moment. That was close, Jack whispered, though he didn't let go of her hand. Emma nodded, suddenly aware of the reality of their situation. What if they find out? What would we even tell them? Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know, he admitted. But I do know I don't want to pretend I don't feel this way about you. They talked for hours on that porch swing, voices low, hands intertwined. They spoke of their fears and hopes, of the complications their feelings created. As the first hint of dawn appeared on the horizon, they knew they had to go back inside before someone found them. At her bedroom door, Jack kissed her once more, softly and quickly. Sweet dreams, he whispered against her ear, his breath making her shiver. Emma slipped back into her room, her mind spinning with what had just happened. She touched her lips, still feeling Jack's kiss, still tasting him. Everything had changed in a single night. As she crawled back into bed, Emma knew sleep would be impossible. Her body hummed with new sensations, her mind filled with Jack's words and touches. Tomorrow would bring questions and challenges, but tonight had been perfect. Across the hall, Jack lay awake too, staring at the ceiling with a smile he couldn't suppress, already counting the hours until he could be alone with Emma again. The next week passed in a whirlwind of stolen moments. Emma and Jack developed a secret language of lingering glances and accidental touches when their parents weren't looking. Every brush of their hands as they passed in the hallway felt electric, charged with possibility. Their parents remained oblivious, pleased that their children seemed to be getting along so well. You two have become such good friends, Emma's mother remarked one evening at dinner. Emma avoided Jack's eyes, knowing she would blush if she met his gaze. Late one afternoon, Emma sat alone in her room, working on a paper for her literature class. Her mother and stepfather had left for a dinner with friends, not expected back for hours. The house was quiet except for the soft rhythm of rain against the windows. A gentle knock made her look up. Jack stood in the doorway, his expression tentative yet filled with longing. "Can I come in?" he asked. Emma nodded, saving her document before closing her laptop. Jack shut the door behind him and crossed the room to sit beside her on the bed. The mattress dipped under his weight, bringing them closer together. "I've barely had a moment alone with you all week," he said, his voice low and warm. His fingers found hers, intertwining them. "I know," Emma replied, "it's been torture." Jack smiled, lifting their joined hands to kiss her knuckles. "I keep thinking about the porch swing." "Me too." Emma's voice was barely above a whisper. This time when their lips met, there was none of the hesitation from that first night. Jack's mouth was urgent against hers, his hands sliding into her hair to cradle her head. Emma responded with equal fervor, her fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt, pulling him closer. They fell back against her pillows, limbs tangling as their kisses grew deeper. Jack's weight pressed her gently into the mattress, his body warm and solid above hers. When his lips trailed to her neck, Emma gasped, her hands clutching his shoulders. "We should talk about this," Emma managed to say, even as her body arched into his touch. "About us? What we're doing?" Jack pulled back slightly, his breathing uneven, his eyes dark with desire. You're right, he agreed, though he didn't move away. His thumb traced her lower lip, making her thoughts scatter. What are we doing, Emma? The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Emma took a deep breath. I don't know. But I know I don't want to stop. Jack's expression softened. Neither do I. He sat up reluctantly, running a hand through his disheveled hair. But maybe we should set some boundaries, figure out what this is before we go too far. Emma nodded, both disappointed and relieved. She sat up beside him, straightening her rumpled shirt. Our parents would freak out if they knew. They would, Jack agreed. But they're not us. They don't feel what we feel. Which is what, exactly? Emma asked, needing to hear him say it. Jack took her hands in his expression serious. I'm falling for you, Emma, not as a stepsister. As a woman I can't stop thinking about, a woman I want to be with. Emma's heart thundered in her chest. I'm falling for you too, she admitted, and it scares me how right it feels when it should feel wrong. Jack leaned forward, pressing his forehead to hers. We don't have to figure everything out right now. We can take it slow, see where this goes. Slow, Emma agreed, even as her body disagreed vehemently with the concept. Jack smiled ruefully, as if reading her thoughts. Slow-ish, he amended, brushing his lips against hers once more. The sound of a car door slamming outside made them jump apart. Emma glanced at her window in alarm. They can't be back already. Jack stood quickly, straightening his clothes. I should go. At the door he paused, looking back at Emma with eyes that promised more to come. Think of me tonight, he said softly. I will, Emma whispered, knowing she would think of little else. After Jack left, Emma pressed her fingers to her lips, still feeling the ghost of his kisses. What had started on the porch swing was growing into something neither of them could control or deny, something that would eventually force them to make difficult choices. Outside her room, she heard Jack greeting their parents, his voice casual as if nothing had happened. Emma smiled to herself. Their secret was safe for now, tucked away in stolen kisses and whispered promises. 2 weeks after their moment in Emma's room, the tension between them had grown almost unbearable. They maintained their careful facade around their parents, but every accidental touch, every lingering glance held the promise of more. Emma found herself constantly aware of Jack's presence, her body responding to him even across a crowded room. One evening, their parents announced they were going away for the weekend to celebrate their 6-month anniversary. You two will be fine on your own, right? Emma's mother asked, already packing her overnight bag. We'll manage, Jack said, his voice casual though his eyes, when they met Emma's, were anything but. After their parents left on Friday evening, the house fell into a charged silence. Emma busied herself in the kitchen, preparing dinner, while Jack set the table. They moved around each other carefully, the air between them crackling with anticipation. Wine? Jack asked, holding up a bottle their parents had left. Emma nodded, accepting the glass he poured. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and Mather pulled away. Jack's thumb stroked across her wrist, sending shivers up her arm. I've been thinking about you all week, he admitted, his voice low. About us? Emma took a sip of wine, gathering her courage. I've been thinking too, about what happens next. They ate dinner slowly, conversation flowing easily between them despite the underlying current of desire. Jack told her about his photography project, his eyes lighting up as he described the abandoned factory he'd discovered. Emma shared her latest short story idea, feeling a thrill when Jack asked to read it sometime. As they cleared the dishes together, Jack paused, setting down the plate he was holding. Emma, he said, his voice serious. I need to know if you're sure about this. About us? Emma turned to face him fully. I'm sure about how I feel, she said. I'm just not sure what we do about it. Jack stepped closer, his hands finding her waist. We could start by being honest with each other, no holding back. No holding back, Emma agreed, her heart pounding. Jack's eyes darkened as he pulled her closer. Then I'll be honest. I want you, Emma, not just as someone to talk to or spend time with. I want all of you. Emma's breath caught at his directness. I want you too, she whispered. This time when they kissed, there was no hesitation, no pulling back. Jack lifted her onto the counter, stepping between her legs as his mouth claimed hers hungrily. Emma wrapped her arms around his neck, drawing him closer, her fingers tangling in his hair. Jack's hands slid under her shirt, warm against her skin. "Is this okay?" he murmured against her lips. "Yes," Emma breathed, arching into his touch. They made their way upstairs, stumbling slightly, unwilling to break contact. At Emma's bedroom door, Jack paused. "Are you sure?" he asked one more time, his eyes searching hers. Emma's answer was to pull him into her room, closing the door behind them. In the soft glow of her bedside lamp, they undressed each other slowly, each new revelation of skin met with gentle touches and whispered appreciation. When they finally lay together on her bed, skin against skin, Emma felt both vulnerable and powerful. Jack's eyes held hers as his hands traced the curves of her body, learning her, memorizing her. "You're beautiful," he whispered, his voice filled with wonder. Their first time together was tender and unhurried, both of them discovering what pleased the other. Jack was patient, his focus entirely on Emma's pleasure before his own. When they finally moved together, finding their rhythm, Emma felt herself falling even harder for him, overwhelmed by the connection between them. Afterward, they lay tangled in her sheets, Jack's arm around her, her head on his chest. His heartbeat gradually slowed beneath her ear, strong and steady. "What are we going to do?" Emma asked softly, reality beginning to creep back in. "About telling them, I mean." Jack's fingers traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "We'll figure it out," he promised. "Together." As sleep began to claim her, Emma realized something had fundamentally shifted between them. What had begun as forbidden attraction had deepened into something much more significant, something that felt remarkably like love. Outside, rain began to fall, drumming gently against her window, cocooning them in their own private world for just a little while longer. The weekend passed in a blur of tangled sheets, shared showers, and whispered conversations. Emma and Jack explored every inch of each other, making love in her room, his room, and once, daringly, on the living room couch. They cooked meals together wearing minimal clothing, fed each other strawberries in bed, and talked for hours about their dreams and fears. By Sunday afternoon, with their parents due home that evening, reality began to intrude on their private paradise. Emma sat at the kitchen table, watching Jack make coffee, admiring the way his muscles moved beneath his t-shirt. "We need to talk about what happens now," she said softly. Jack placed a mug in front of her before sitting down. "I know." His eyes met hers, serious and tender. "I don't want to go back to pretending, Emma. Not after this weekend." Emma wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "Me neither. But telling them, it's going to be complicated." "Maybe we don't tell them right away," Jack suggested, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Maybe we give ourselves some time first. To be sure." "Are you not sure?" Emma asked, a note of vulnerability in her voice. Jack's expression softened. "Unsure about you," he said firmly. "I've never been more sure of anything. I just think we need to be strategic about how we handle this." The sound of a car pulling into the driveway made them both freeze. Their parents weren't supposed to be home for hours yet. "Shit," Jack whispered, quickly letting go of Emma's hand. They scrambled to clear away evidence of their intimate breakfast, straightening their clothes and hair as the front door opened. "We're home early," Emma's mother called out cheerfully. "The weather forecast changed, so we decided to beat the storm." The next few days were torture. Emma and Jack reverted to their careful public personas, but now every moment of pretense was painful. At night, they would text from their separate bedrooms, expressing what they couldn't say aloud, planning brief moments to be alone. One afternoon, Emma was studying in her room when Jack slipped in, quietly closing the door behind him. "I can't take this anymore," he said, voice low but intense. "I need to touch you." He crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. His kiss was desperate, hungry, and Emma responded with equal fervor. Her books tumbled forgotten to the floor as Jack pressed her back onto the bed, his hands already sliding under her shirt. "We shouldn't," Emma gasped, even as she arched into his touch. "They're just downstairs." "I know," Jack murmured against her neck. "We'll be quiet." His hands were skilled now, knowing exactly how to touch her to make her body respond. When his fingers slipped beneath the waistband of her sweatpants, Emma bit her lip to stifle a moan. Jack watched her face as he touched her, his eyes dark with desire. I love watching you, he whispered. Love knowing I can make you feel this way. Emma clutched at his shoulders as pleasure built within her. Jack, she breathed, her voice barely audible. When the wave finally crashed over her, Jack captured her cry with his mouth, kissing her deeply as she trembled beneath him. As her breathing slowed, she reached for him, wanting to return the pleasure he'd given her. Not now, he said, stilling her hand. Tonight? Meet me in the basement after they're asleep. That night, Emma crept downstairs to find Jack waiting in the small finished room in the basement. He'd set up a makeshift bed with blankets and pillows, a single lamp casting soft light over the space. Our hideaway, he said, opening his arms to her. In the quiet darkness of the basement, they made love slowly, luxuriating in the freedom to touch and taste without fear of discovery. Afterward, lying in his arms, Emma traced patterns on Jack's chest. We should look for our own place, Jack said suddenly. Somewhere we can be together properly. Emma raised her head to look at him. You mean move out? Together? Jack nodded, his expression earnest. I'm serious about us, Emma. I want a real chance for us, without all this sneaking around. Emma's heart swelled. You do that, for us? I'd do anything for us, Jack said simply, because I love you. The words hung in the air between them, new and powerful. Emma felt tears spring to her eyes as she leaned down to kiss him. I love you too, she whispered against his lips. 2 weeks after their declaration of love in the basement, Emma and Jack had their plan in place. Jack had found an affordable apartment near campus where they could live together, and they had saved enough for the security deposit. All that remained was telling their parents. They chose a Sunday dinner, when everyone was relaxed and well-fed. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she helped clear the dishes, knowing what was coming. Jack caught her eye across the table, giving her a small, reassuring nod. Mom, Dave, Jack began, addressing his father and Emma's mother. We have something important to talk to you about. The conversation that followed was every bit as difficult as they had anticipated. Confusion gave way to disbelief, then shock, and finally a tense silence fell over the dining room. This isn't right, Emma's mother said finally, her voice strained. Your family now. We're not related by blood, Jack pointed out gently, and we didn't grow up together. We met as adults. But still, his father interjected, it's unusual. We understand this is a shock, Emma said, reaching for Jack's hand across the table, no longer hiding her feelings. But we wanted to be honest with you. We love each other. Their parents exchanged troubled glances. We need some time to process this, Emma's mother said finally. It's a lot to take in. That night, Emma and Jack whispered together in her room, the door left pointedly open at their parents' insistence. That could have gone worse, Jack said softly, sitting beside her on the bed, careful to maintain a respectable distance. Could have gone better too, Emma replied, longing to touch him but aware of her mother's frequent passes by the open door. The following days were awkward, with family meals conducted in strained silence. Emma overheard her mother crying on the phone to a friend. Jack's father suggested therapy for all of them. A week after their revelation, Emma was alone in her room when her mother knocked and entered, sitting beside her on the bed. I've been thinking about what you told us, she began slowly. About you and Jack. Emma steeled herself for another argument, but her mother surprised her by taking her hand. I remember how it felt to fall in love with Dave, she continued. That overwhelming feeling that nothing else matters. Is that how you feel about Jack? Emma nodded, tears filling her eyes. It is. I've never felt this way before. Her mother sighed deeply. I can't pretend I understand completely, or that this is what I wanted for either of you. But I love you, Emma, and I want you to be happy. That evening, the four of them sat down together again. The conversation was difficult, but different this time. There were questions, concerns, but also, tentatively, acceptance. We're moving out next weekend, Jack announced, his arm around Emma's shoulders. We found a place near campus. Their parents nodded, resignation mixing with grudging support. We'll help you move, Dave offered, the first genuine olive branch. Moving day arrived with unexpected sunshine. Their parents helped carry boxes, arrange furniture, and even brought a housewarming gift, a new coffee maker and 2 mugs. As evening fell and they prepared to leave, Emma's mother hugged her tightly. "Be happy," she whispered. "That's all I've ever wanted for you." When they were finally alone in their new apartment, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, Jack pulled Emma into his arms. "We did it," he said, kissing her deeply. "No more sneaking around. No more pretending." That night, they christened their new bed, making love without fear of discovery, whispering words of love and promise as their bodies moved together in perfect harmony. Afterward, as moonlight filtered through their new curtains, Emma rested her head on Jack's chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Was it worth it?" she asked softly. "All the complications, the difficult conversations." Jack's fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "You are worth everything," he said simply. "I would do it all again in a heartbeat." In the months that followed, their relationship with their parents slowly improved. Sunday dinners resumed, awkward at first, but gradually becoming more natural. Emma's mother began referring to Jack as her son-in-law, even before there was a ring, and Jack's father helped them buy their first car together. Their unconventional beginning had led to something beautiful and lasting. As Emma fell asleep in Jack's arms in their own home, she knew that sometimes the most unexpected turns in life led to exactly where you were meant to be all along.